Okay, oh, what's this?
And you're going to have to really speak up so we can hear you too.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, okay. Um, okay, so I guess I agree with Jerry. This is what I prepared before I got here, and I'm sticking with it, even though I would probably change it a lot if I were to start over. So I was asked to speak about the SEED network and the report that the SEED network produced called Steps to an Ecology of Networked Knowledge and Innovation. SEED stands for Science, Engineering, Art, and Design. And basically, SEED has existed as an informal network for a long time. It's been self-organizing, and the network has grown significantly as more and more people have been using comparable tools. More and more ideas about collaborative projects have basically resulted in the formation of this network. So it includes, as you might imagine, based on the acronym, people from the natural sciences, the life sciences, arts, humanities. Basically anyone who's working collaboratively is a part of the network. And after several NSF workshops, the group was funded through the NSF Human-Centered Computing Program to actually create a network to support science, engineering, art, and design. And mostly what I'm going to do today is present the report and then respond to the grand challenge that Annie sent to me. So the methodology that was chosen was to ask people to submit white papers outlining the obstacles they found in the course of pursuing their work, as well as to identify challenges and opportunities that they were looking for. The network was conceived primarily as an advocacy group, and there were 4 areas identified: culture and economic development, research and creative work, learning and education, and collaboration and partnerships. So in writing these white papers, people were asked to include suggested actions that would be targeted to specific groups. So for example, people who had concerns about tenure in terms of doing interdisciplinary work would have targeted research and creative work. And funding, of course, came up across many of the groups. So I'll get to that more as I speak. There were 73 abstracts submitted for white papers. 55 white papers were written, and there were more than 200 participants, including steering committee members, papers that had multiple authors, and so forth. There were 4 meta-analyses done. Some people felt that the white papers weren't comprehensive enough, so they were invited to do meta-analyses, but they mostly picked a subset of papers for each of the meta-analyses, so it wasn't really comprehensive in that respect. And so what we did was we took the suggested actions at the end of each of the white papers, and we collated them into action clusters. And you can see the terms in red basically give a quick view of the areas that were identified as areas that people were thinking about. And of course, a lot of it is much more amorphous than you can show with a word, because, for example, convening was one that always made me laugh. Everyone wanted to convene a conference, but some people wanted to discuss art and dance. And other people said, well, we should talk about adding coding to humanities curricula. So, you know, it's like, okay. Everybody thought there should be more funding, but yeah. Yeah, I agree. So we can talk about this more, and I put my PowerPoint into the presentation folder, so if anyone wants to reference it, it's all there. So basically, these are the results. I think it was clear we were looking for a pulse of the SEED community, and so basically, the report serves as like a source book of what people within the community were thinking. So sufficient statistics was not a goal, and so there aren't really good statistics that we could draw upon in deciding where we want to go. But rather it's a spectrum of the kinds of work that people are doing who are involved in a transdisciplinary space. So as I said, the papers do not represent a collective aim, nor was there an explicit initiative as a result of this project. And I guess the other thing is that the ecology reference in the title was more to convey that it was a self-organizing ecological type process rather than anything that had to do with the environment. And I confirmed that by looking through the papers before I came here, and there was no paper that dealt with the environment within the group. I drew out 6 papers that used ecological ideas. One person was doing greening initiatives within academic and community settings. And when I looked at the paper, one of the things that stood out was that she didn't say where her funding came from. So I imagine that she was possibly self-funded. And then one paper had interviews with collaborative teams, and there was a geologist and an architect, so that had kind of an earthly feel to it. But mostly ecology was used in the sense that it's a good metaphor for the kinds of ways that people are working. So here are the demographics. It was about 50% male-female. It was more academic than non-academic, which meant that there were a lot of people who had concerns related to academia. One of the interesting papers was by a woman who was an artist, and she didn't have any degrees, and she had worked successfully with scientists throughout her career and had felt that scientists were more supportive of her art projects than people within the art space. And she was concerned that this kind of project was going to create barriers in terms of her doing her work, because there would be all kinds of guidelines put into place, so that because she didn't have advanced degrees or anything, things would be harder rather than the project being helpful. Areas of practice is not a good category, because many of the people in art and design had a background in science. Many of the people who were scientists had studied art, so the graphic isn't really meaningful. It's an international distribution because the network has always been international. So people who were a part of the informal network obviously participated in the white paper process. And you can see this better when you look at the site views. This is the seed site during the time that we were working on the report. And the darker areas represent people who visited. And as you can see, North America had the most visitation. There were a number of papers from India, so that's a dark area on the site and so forth. The totals are on one of the slides. I'm not going to go through that. So I'm not going to read the grand challenge because we all know what it is and we've talked about it today. Rather, what I want to do is move into looking back and issues that we face in addressing the grand challenge. And so the report was finished in 2013, I believe. And I've been working on a book the last couple of years, so I haven't really given much thought to it. So it was kind of a fun exercise to go back and reflect on it. And I know that some of the other people are still presenting it at conferences and stuff, so I'm sort of just offering my take here. And one of the things that really stood out in terms of what we're doing today is that there was an event planned in Washington, D.C., and Bill was involved, and I think Brian was there. And there were all these presentations. There were people from all the funding agencies. Someone from the White House was there. A lot of people who do art and science work presented their work and so forth. And there was a lot of buzz and excitement and so forth. And during the breaks and afterwards, everyone would come up to me and say, well, this is really exciting, but what's your program? What do you plan to do with this? You know, it's great to talk. It's very visionary in some respect. So I think that really specific benchmarks, I thought Jerry had a nice, clear sense of what was needed. Specific benchmarks and multi-year funding are really, you know, what you need to do if you want to have something that's really substantial, you know, that really speaks to people. And then the other thing that I started to think about is the relationship between STEM and STEAM, because that's come up a few times here as well. So I know everyone understands that the STEAM idea is bringing art into the STEM program. And I've worked in a lot of STEM environments. I'm a visual artist, but I worked in a STEM laboratory before I went to graduate school. And they were one of the first laboratories that was bringing educational technology into education. They were one of the first people that the NSF funded to do that. And I also spent many years working as a docent at the Lawrence Hall of Science in Berkeley. I don't know if any of you are acquainted with it. And basically, one of the things that I would always say while I was working at the hall is, this is exactly the kind of thing that artists would be doing. You know, it's the same tools, the same kind of problem solving, and modeling and visualization and all of those kinds of things. And like Jerry was saying, they always had art exhibits up, and they have all kinds of exhibits there, like a sunstones project that they used to look at the skies, you know, at the solstice, that was an art and science collaboration. And I think that STEM is already doing things that involve artists based on my experience. And so I think I would emphasize the integration that already exists because people are using the same tools. And then the other thing that I started to think about that I wanted to share, and it's come up over and over as I've talked to people since I arrived here, is the number of people who don't identify with the seed community who are already integrating science, art, and technology in what they do. And so I wanted to introduce, I saw someone from CERN was going to be here, and it reminded me of Robert Wilson's work. He was the first director of Fermilab. And I don't know if anyone is familiar, if anyone's visited Fermilab, but he was a sculptor also. And when he was offered the directorship, he was thinking about quitting science and just becoming a sculptor. But he decided that instead he was going to create an environmental preserve. And so this is Fermilab. It's over 7,000 acres, and they do ecological studies, and they have bison and all kinds of wildlife roaming around. This is an aerial view. Anyway, I'm not going to bother with that. So basically, when I first discovered Robert Wilson's work, it was like, wow, you know, I have to go see it. So what I'm trying to say is, the other thing I thought would be really good was to have like destination places, and Jerry kind of touched on that also. So this is Robert Wilson's sculpture. While he was director, he put pieces of his art all over the lab. And I can still remember the visceral experience going through broken symmetry to enter the lab when I went to visit. And it's this huge, huge piece. You can't get a sense of it from the picture. And it's asymmetrical any way you look at it until you go to the sweet spot underneath. And if you position yourself there, everything is just totally symmetrical. And as I said, you know, like destination spots just seem to be one of the things that we should think about. So I think I've run out of time, and I'm happy to talk about all of this with everybody later. So thank you very much. And thank you for asking me to present. I'm so glad to be here.
So I don't know how best to do this next bit, which is where
We want to hear from you guys.